Hello students. In today's video, I'll be giving you a brief summary of the poem Preludes as well as some points on critical appreciation of the poem. The poem Preludes, as we know, is a chain of 4 short poems or sections. The first poem or section is set on a winter evening at 6 o'clock. We are treated to the sights, sounds, and smells of this evening. The smell of the dinner being cooked in nearby restaurants, the rain showering down on the chimney pots of the houses, the wind blowing the fallen leaves and discarded newspapers across the street. This opening poem concludes with the coming of night and the lighting of the street lamps. The second section or second poem takes place in the morning when people are rising from bed and trudging to work, stopping at coffee stands for a pick-me-up on the way. There is still a faint smell of stale beer, a reminder of the previous night. Countless people all over the town or city are getting ready to resume the masquerades of daily life, be it work, school, or other chores. The poem's speaker imagines all the people raising the dingy shades in their furnished rooms to let in the morning light. The third poem changes track a little, and rather than using the first or third person, the speaker addresses directly using the second person you. This time the focus is on lying awake at night, unable to sleep, watching the night revealing all the sordid images lying deep inside the mind. Probably the poet is here hinting at the thoughts of a prostitute. This is a wonderful evocation of the way the mind becomes awash with horrible images when we can't sleep. Sleep continues to elude us, and then it is morning, the light reappearing and the sparrows chirping outside. We are then treated to the most remarkable pair of lines in the whole of Preludes. How can the street understand our vision of it? One possible way to interpret this is to say that when we have been kept up all night by unpleasant thoughts, we feel different about the world outside. While everyone else now stepping out into the street has been blissfully ignorant and asleep, we have been on a dark night of the soul and feel we have come to see the world for what it really is. And then, one must get up and get ready for work anyway, despite the sleepless night, taking the paper from one's hair or massaging one's feet ready to begin the walk to work again. The fourth and final poem or section returns to the evening for its setting. We get the bizarre, Leforget's inspired image of a person's soul stretched tight across the skies. Gods, perhaps, whom the modern material world has forgotten in its impatience to get on with the tasks and course of day-to-day living. This would make sense if we interpret the soul stretched across the evening skies as a reference to the sunset. But the soul is not trampled beneath the insistent feet of people heading home from work. The world is full of impatient activity and people striding confidently about their business. Men stuffing their pipes, reading the evening newspapers, eyes looking sure of themselves. The street is corrupted, blackened by pollution and industrialization, but also black in a more abstract, metaphorical way. But amongst all this, the speaker of the poem is moved by fancies that can be found curled around these sordid urban images. Some being who is gentle and suffering infinitely, But before he can get too romantically sentimental about this, the speaker seems to straighten himself up and clear his throat and recollect himself and say, "You have to laugh." The poem then ends with the bizarre image of these different worlds inhabited by people revolving like ancient women who are gathering fuel in vacant lots. Now, this is a particular interpretation of this poem Preludes, and there are several interpretations according to the view of a particular critic or a writer. This is the summary which I have presented in this particular video is one of those interpretations. Now, coming to the critical appreciation points related to the poem, we all know that Preludes by T.S. Eliot contains complex imagistic narrative on the dark and depressing nature of city life and the state of the human soul. Many of Eliot's greatest poems, and especially his earlier poems, are cityscapes. They explore life in the busy metropolis, whether it's London, Boston, or even Paris. And Eliot had learned how to write about the city from reading a number of French symbolist poets of the 19th century. We can see this method clearly at work in Preludes, particularly in that closing description of the infinitely suffering thing and the idea of the soul stretched tight across the sky at the beginning of that final section. Eliot is describing the sunset stretched out against the sky, but he employs the romantic and spiritual term soul to elevate this image. We are invited to observe the contrast between the grubbiness of the city with its newspaper vendors, cigarette butts, steak dinners, and coffee cups, and the beauty of the sunset. Day in, day out, the sun keeps rising and setting. Things don't change. The world keeps turning, and things largely remain constant. There seems to be little escape from the everyday urban life of drudgery. You get up, you go to work, you come home, and you sleep, or try to sleep rather, and you do it all again the next day. Even the horses driving the cabs are steaming and stamping as if frustrated with their lot in life. Of course, they are also stamping because that is what horses do. This picture of urban life makes Preludes an important precursor, or indeed a prelude to T.S. Eliot's later poem, The Waste Land. The images of the modern metropolitan world, which we find in Preludes as well as many of the other poems in Eliot's first volume of poems, the cigarette ends, the cups of coffee, the vacant lots, are partly a result of the influence of the French poet Charles Baudelaire on Eliot. It is partly what helps to make him a modern poet, focusing on urban social alienation and the landscape of the city rather than on nature and the pastoral. He treats his characters and his scenes without sentiment, but nevertheless his poems contain an emotional intensity which Baudelaire had shown the way for. Modern poetry did not have to be cold and emotionless. So that's all for the summary and critical appreciation of the poem Preludes by T.S. Eliot. There are other elements, literary elements and critical elements which you need to incorporate in your answer regarding the critical appreciation of this poem Preludes. For that, I'll be sharing notes with you in the form of PDF file. That's all for today's lesson. Thank you.